In today's video, I want to chat to you guys about beneficial ownership returns for complex companies. Good day, my name is Heinrich Revere from SA Accounting Network, and I've been in the accounting industry since 2008. Quite recently, SIPC and even the receiver of revenue started with a new requirement where we need to disclose who the beneficial owners are of companies, and that is the reason why I'm doing this video. Quite recently, I released a video for owner-managed companies where it's a very simple structure. The owner is the shareholder, so there's no separation of the two of those. I've had quite a few inquiries about what to do with more complex structures, and obviously with bigger type of companies you need to sit and apply your mind. And once again, as I said previously as well, that I'm not a specialist in this area, so I decided to call on the big guns, the guys from Tax Consulting South Africa, and I'm really privileged to have these guys on standby, and we're going to discuss some of the stuff when it comes to complex beneficial ownership returns. So just before we start with that interview, remember just to give the video a like and remember to hit the subscribe channel. Let me head down to my computer, then we can show what we've done. Micaela, you guys, do you maybe introduce yourself quickly just to the viewers and just say what it is that you guys do at Tax Consulting South Africa?
Perfect. So hi everyone, my name is Micaela. I'm a tax attorney at Tax Consulting South Africa. So we deal with a wide range of matters that in respect of companies, trusts, tax, of course. Yes.
Perfect.
And hi everyone, my name is Kele and I'm Corporate Governance Administrator at Tax Consulting South Africa. And I have of late been dealing specifically with CIPC compliance on many of the entities that we've been dealing with.
Yes. So I think maybe this the start off question is why all of a sudden this whole thing about beneficial ownership returns? Where does it come from? Why now all of a sudden all the noise about this?
Sure. So the Financial Action Task Force conducted an investigation into South Africa's measures that they have in place to combat money laundering and terrorist financing. They unfortunately picked up some deficiencies that we have in our system, or that we had in our system at the time, and gave us some recommendations. One of those recommendations was for regulators to have access to up-to-date and accurate information, beneficial ownership information. It's also something to mention is that it's not something new. We have seen with a lot of leading jurisdictions across the world, they already have beneficial ownership requirements in place. So we might be a bit late to the party, but I suppose it's better late than never.
For sure.
And I guess from a CIPC point of view, in response to these law changes that were initiated, the CIPC then announced the upcoming implementation for beneficial ownership, their program on beneficial ownership and the filing thereof. So yeah.
Yes.
It's still the beginning of a journey.
Yeah.
It's a very new landscape.
Yeah, for sure. And what is the deadline? When does the first round of returns need to be submitted? And I think we can maybe just talk about the subsequent returns as well after the guys have filed their first returns.
So currently the initial deadline is the 1st of October, because this came in place around the 1st of April, and 6 months thereafter would be the 1st of October, excuse me. For all newly incorporated companies, they need to make sure that they file their beneficial ownership within 10 days of incorporating. And thereafter, every year when you file your annual returns, you should make amendments. If there are any amendments, really, you should file your beneficial ownership. So it's a 10-day gap from incorporation and a 10-day gap from filing your annual returns.
Yeah, that's good. So I think that's definitely something new. I've been reading up, like you rightly said, there's overseas in Europe and stuff. I think it's better known as AML legislation, so the anti-money laundering legislation. And they're quite strict about it. We're going to talk about the penalties and stuff just now. As I mentioned previously, that I did a video quite recently on owner-managed companies, but the purpose of today's talk is when we look at more complex structures. What would something like that look like if I own maybe 50 shares in Richmond, and just taking that for an example? Do they need to put my stuff onto their beneficial ownership returns, or what is the limit? Where do we draw the line?
So yeah, I think a lot of companies, especially companies with a huge international presence, are a bit nervous about this, because where do you even start? You've got a complex structure, you've got local entities, foreign entities, local trusts, foreign trusts, you sort of have to trace the beneficial ownership, and analyze the entire structure. So it's not easy. It is a complex thing to navigate, and it's so important to ensure that the information submitted is actually accurate. Just to take it a step back, we need to remember that this information, beneficial ownership information, will be shared with law enforcers, with your SARS as well. So you can imagine, where the information given through to other regulatory authorities is not correct, there might be severe burdens. But yeah, getting back to, the sort of more complex structures, we have seen as well that when an affected company is involved, all those who have 5% or more beneficial ownership must declare that to the CIPC. But beneficial ownership also doesn't just stop at ownership. It's also effective control. So essentially, it could be anyone, who has an influence on the decision making or the operations of the company. I'm not sure what you've seen from a practical point of view, Kele, in terms of CIPC and those more complex structures.
Yeah, I would agree with you on that. For all the complex structures, we really, really need to sit and do proper due diligence, actually understand who does what and from where, and their responsibilities there are, the control that they have in the companies. And that's the only way then we can actually file correctly. Like Micaela just said, that this information is being shared with other, regulatory bodies, and it has to be 100%. It has to be on the mark. So it is complex, due diligence all the way. There's no shortcut to it, but it has to be done.
Also, just on the complex landscape that needs to be navigated, we see time and again Treasury introduces a law. They try to close a gap, fix something, and the law is more often than not much too wide. It catches entities, people, companies that shouldn't actually be included. So we hope that as time goes on, that they refine that law so that it's not this, blanket declaration that everyone needs to make. Got a complex structure. It might not be relevant to have that information on record for certain companies.
Yes. I quite recently, one of the companies that I dealt with is the majority shareholder is an international company. So what do you do then? I think the South African guys only own like 30% shares in the company. The rest is held by an international New York listed company. So I mean, you can't declare that you've got 1 million people in the United States that's got a beneficial ownership in your company. So I think, yeah, consultation, I think that's where you guys fit into the picture. And we'll talk a little bit about that as well just now. And I think maybe something that we can maybe just ask now as well is I've had quite a few queries about people with trusts and non-for-profit companies, NPCs, sports clubs, those type of things. What do they do? Do they also need to comply with these things? Because especially if you think about non-for-profit companies, the people who gets the benefit is actually the members or the people they're doing the work for. So how do you approach something like that?
Sure. So I think to start with trusts, just because you mentioned it first,
yes.
We obviously trusts also have to file their own beneficial ownership declarations, but then also when it comes to a trust having or trustees effectively having shares in a company, that sort of needs to be declared. You need to usually, in my understanding, is you usually need to declare the details of the trustees, the beneficiaries, although there might not necessarily be an ownership percentage. That still needs to be declared. CIPC has actually updated their functionality, if I'm not mistaken, to provide for that. I'm not sure how that works.
So on the CIPC portal, what it is that if there is no ownership percentage, you can declare it as 0. And you would just then list the trustees and the founders or, based on your trust deed and the beneficiaries and everyone.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting that they made that change quite recently, just before the looming deadline. But to get back to the question at hand with the NPCs and the NPOs, I mean, if we just look at the beneficial ownership definition in the Companies Act, that is, as I mentioned, quite wide. So it's not just ownership; it's effective control. So it's it's arguably it could extend to NPCs on that perspective, but with NPCs and NPOs, it is quite a different landscape to navigate. It's not always clear cut. So it's also, once again, it must be examined on a case by case basis when dealing with such entities, to just make sure that, if you don't need to declare, you don't need to, but if it is required, it's better to just be fully compliant.
I mean, we were just having a chat earlier that an NPO doesn't have a company registration number that would then be filtered into the CIPC. So from that perspective already, NPOs are cut off on a CIPC compliance point of view.
Yes.
They then would then not be able to file on CIPC.
Yes. Yeah, I think you also mentioned something earlier that whatever you declare at CIPC need to correspond with what you declare at the receiver of revenue. I know this year with the company tax returns, they already have that functionality. As soon as you start submitting the return, they want to know who's all the beneficial owners, So if what you declare to the receiver of revenue doesn't correspond with what you've got at Sub-C, then you're going to run into deep water. And I think, I think if I've got, or obviously the viewers now, I'm just talking in first person, if I've got a complex business, where do I start with this? Where can I get hold of you guys if I need some help to decipher this thing? And I think probably the first time is going to be quite a labor-intensive exercise to understand how the whole process works and stuff. But I think once you get like a working document where you can register all the people and you know what needs to be submitted where, then it's probably quite easy to maintain. But if somebody wants to get hold of you guys to maybe make an appointment, who needs assistance with complex structures, where can they get hold of you guys?
Also, just to take it a step back, it is, like you said, very advisable to get proper advice when declaring beneficial ownership. To reach us, our website is www.taxconsultingsa.co.za. There you'll find mine and Kele's details as well as the company's details. We have a branch in Johannesburg and George. We are based in the Johannesburg office, but we assist clients countrywide.
Perfect. Yeah, I think in the description of the video, I will obviously share your email addresses as well, so that people can reach out directly to you guys as well. I think those are all the questions that I wanted to ask. I think maybe one more question that we didn't discuss is penalties. Like I mentioned just now, I read that in Europe, if the guys don't file the beneficial ownership returns, I think they talk about a €5,000 penalty for not submitting it. What is the situation at the moment in South Africa? Are there going to be penalties, and how strict do you think would they enforce those penalties?
So currently, I mean, a compliance notice may be issued in terms of Section 171 of the Companies Act, and an administrative penalty of over R1 million or 10% of the company's turnover. So ideally, I would encourage,
compliance. Yes, 100%. Especially again with the looming deadline of the 1st of October.
Yes.
It's really important to get that up to date.
Yeah, for sure. I think that the risk is for people, new people coming into the business arena, or people that are starting businesses. They from the beginning know, okay, we have to do all these things: annual returns, Sub-C, beneficial ownership returns. But I think where the risk lies is people who's had businesses for 20 or 30 years. Now, somewhere on the radio, they hear, oh, there's a new return. They just stick their head in the ground and just ignore it. And all of a sudden, they sit with this huge penalty that they have to pay. So I think, I think the main thing is we need to get the word out there and just create awareness, that the people must know that they mustn't take this thing lightly, that Sub-C. And I think the South African government is quite serious about this, because I think since they enacted the New Companies Act, there was unfortunately a split between the ownership and the management of companies, not like the old CCs where the member was fulfill both roles, where now at the moment they can't really trace who's the actual shareholders of the companies. And I think that is what they're trying to tighten up a bit now. And I think that's just my understanding of how I see it. Yeah. So I think it's good. Yes. I once again just want to thank you, both of you, for your time today. I really appreciate it. I know that your time is probably more precious than what my time is. And I'm sure that the people watching this video is going to get a lot of benefit from this video as well. And then, just thanks for your time. It was lovely chatting to you guys.
Thank you so much for having us. Much appreciated.
Thank you, Henrik, and thank you to everyone who's going to listen to this.
Thanks.